Good evening. Welcome to the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. For those of you outside Israel, maybe where it's not evening yet, good afternoon. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here. It's my pleasure to welcome you either in person or virtually to this event that we have here. We have regular events for English speakers, both here at the Begin Center itself and also on Zoom as webinars. I see a number of people here who are regular attendees. I also see some people who have been guests at our event before. And it's my pleasure to welcome you.
Welcome to Talkback. Page 1 is cabin. Cancel button. Emergency.
I'm being upstaged by Siri.
Is it something you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Can you? All right. Thank you. For those, for anyone on Zoom that didn't catch that, someone's phone started talking to us. All right. I often think when I speak to friends outside Israel, friends and family, that on the one hand, we of course are dealing with we here in Israel are dealing with the reality of war, with all its trials and tribulations and sometimes horrors. We are the ones who are many of us will have friends or family serving and having to worry about that. Some of us have people still held hostage in Gaza. And so we are the ones who I think are can understand in a way that I think is difficult for people outside Israel to understand exactly what it's like to be dealing with this situation, the reality that we've been in since October 7th. On the other hand, there's something happening outside Israel, which we are mercifully spared, which is this extraordinary explosion of anti-Semitism in a way that I think surprised even those of us that have been thinking about these things and reading and writing about these things for some years. And we've seen it, of course, on college campuses, we've seen it in the media, we've seen it on demonstrations and protests in cities across Europe and North America. And I'm not telling anyone here anything new when I say that this is it's something that I think has shocked some people out of their complacency, is perhaps the one little silver lining, that people who previously didn't really think much about anti-Semitism as a live issue in the 21st century and didn't think about the connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, have been forced to confront them and have been forced to see that, amongst other things, that the people who are marching in the streets of London and New York and Montreal and elsewhere, chanting from the river to the sea, without knowing which river, which sea, usually, are also people that are, don't have a lot of time for the countries to which they belong. These are people that are often very, very quick to condemn Britain, America, and the West more broadly, and to deface monuments and other things. And I think that I think has also shaken some people out of their complacency. We had posted a couple of months ago here David Hirsh from London, the CEO of the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. And we've welcomed him back with some other guests because the Centre has published what I think is a first, actually, a series of responses to October 7th. Three books, an anthology of essays from different perspectives, looking at, respectively, Antisemitic Discourse, Law and Society, and Universities. And I think it's a really important contribution to the debate, especially because the debate is so often, as we know, polluted with the kind of propaganda and anti-Israel rhetoric that we're so familiar with. So I'm really happy to be able to have this to do this event here. The books are outside. You can, I think, you can purchase some afterwards. And how this is going to work is, first I'm going to remind everyone to turn off their phone. I feel like that request went unheard by some people in the room. So everyone gets a second chance. But I'm going to ask, I'm going to invite one of the co-editors of the book, of the series, to speak a little about the series. I'm then going to invite a very special guest who I'll also introduce to speak as well, and then we'll have a panel discussion and then open the floor, open to questions from the floor. So let me just briefly introduce who our three speakers are going to be, and then I will invite one of them up to speak. So we have with us, as I said, David Hirsh, who's the academic director and CEO of the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. He's also a senior lecturer at Goldsmiths, University of London. He's spent many years working on this issue of contemporary anti-Zionism and its relationship to anti-Semitism. At Goldsmiths, he teaches sociology, criminology, crimes against humanity, and human rights courses. He was central in building what was called the Engage network and website that led opposition to an academic boycott of Israel in the early 2000s. He was also a leading critic of the ideas that underpin the Jeremy Corbyn movement, and he's been instrumental in shaping the democratic and Jewish responses in Britain and elsewhere to anti-Semitism. And we'll be hearing from David later. We'll also be hearing momentarily from his colleague at the London Centre, Rosa Freedman, who's the inaugural professor of law, conflict and global development at the University of Reading in the UK. She received her LLB, LLM and PhD from the University of London. She's a non-practicing barrister and member of the Honourable Society of Gray's Inn. Her research focuses on the UN and human rights. She published extensively on UN human rights bodies and systems and on UN peacekeeping and accountability, human rights abuses committed during such operations. She's published many works, including 3 monographs and co-edited collections and articles. And last but by no means least, we're really honored to have with us Michal Cotler Wunsh, who is Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism. She's also a great friend of the Begin Center. She's a prominent public speaker, researcher, and independent policy and strategy advisor on the issues of the intersecting issues of anti-Semitism, law, human rights, and Zionism. She served for 1 term in the Knesset, where she was served on a number of important committees, including the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee and the Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee. Whilst in the Knesset, she also initiated and led multiple Knesset hearings on the topic of online anti-Semitism, engaging social media platforms, civil society organizations, and technology experts. And she co-founded there the Interparliamentary Task Force to combat online anti-Semitism, together with multi-partisan elected officials from Canada, Australia, the US, and the UK. Okay, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to invite Professor Rosa Freedman to tell us about these wonderful books.
Thank you so much. Sorry, come on. It is shorter. I'm not as tall as you. Steven, stop video. Thank you so much to all of you for coming out tonight and to the Begin Center for hosting us. We in the diaspora felt impotent on the 7th of October and immediately after the 7th of October. For those of us that keep 2 days Chag, which is why many of you did actually make Aliyah, we kind of knew, we heard whisperings, we had no idea what was going on. And we turned on our phones and the news after our Simchat Torah, and it felt like time to stop still. And we felt, there's no other word other than impotent, we froze. We could check in with our families, with our friends, with people we love. We could start drives to buy toothbrushes, to support buying helmets for soldiers, but there was nothing we could do. And for people of my age, we'd heard our parents talk about this from the 67 war, from the Yom Kippur War, but we'd never gone through it ourselves. And we at the Centre, the London Centre, the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism, have a platform. And all of us who have a platform, whether it's celebrities, whether it's wonderful people who work in show business, whether it's people who work in politics, we felt a drive to use whatever platforms we had to try to support Israel in a way that certainly in my lifetime had never been necessary. I turned to David, who set up the centre, is the driving force behind the centre and has been tackling anti-Semitism in the UK and beyond for longer than I've been in academia. And I said, we have a book series, and that's very important. But right now, a few weeks after October 7th, I said, right now, can we use this to collect responses to the 7th of October? Can we document? Can we evidence what's going on? Can we give people a voice to what's going on? So we put out a call to our networks and on LinkedIn to people that we didn't know and said, could you write 3,000 words? Not great theory, not things that will change the academic world, but things that, and I always say this, that my mother will read and understand, because my mother's a very intelligent woman. She's not trained in law or sociology or biology, but when she reads something, she needs to read it in not jargon. It needs to make sense to her. So we put out this call for papers, and we had so many responses that we had to create 3 books in this anthology, and even then we had to reject some very good papers. They're really raw. There are responses, us as an academic community. There are responses to what happened to 7th of October. Individually, there's an amazing piece by John Strawson about his visit to Kfar Aza. Theoretically, there's an amazing piece by Eric Heinzer about how the left is really good at making everyone else criticize itself, but never any good at self-criticism where it comes to anti-Semitism. And practically, there's some really good pieces about practically what can we do around trauma moving forward in a country that can only be deeply traumatized at every level. So we put together these 3 volumes. We gave people 4 weeks to write, which if you're a journalist, you think is a very, very long time. And if you're an academic, you think is absolutely impossible. We gave them 4 weeks to write, and then David and I spent, with Adelia, who also worked on this book with us, spent about 5 weeks editing, talking to our contributors, and getting these books ready to go to the publisher. So the books that are outside today are responses then. Everything has changed since then. Everything changes every day, every minute. But they're responses that showcase life as it was for us in the diaspora immediately after 7th of October. And we've grouped them into 3 themes. They're quite loose themes. One is anti-Semitic discourse, and particularly on the left. Why is it that people immediately, before I had turned my phone on after Chag, were talking about legitimate acts of resistance? Why is it that anti-Semitism rose so disproportionately before Israel had even counted her dead? So we looked at the discourse in that one. Another one looks at law and society globally. So it looks at the difference between the anti-Semitic response in Norway, where the Norwegians have a visceral hatred, not all, but many, of Israel because of the failure of the Oslo Accords, and therefore the failure of Norway to become a peace negotiator. The difference between that and Poland, where Jews were expelled again after the Second World War, 20 years later, and the type of anti-Semitism there. The anti-Semitism in Germany, where we would all expect that shawls would never have swastikas drawn on them again. It also documents Mexico. Sorry, I was smiling because my brother just put his hand up halfway through. It's a good time, people. Mexico, Uruguay, Canada, globally, what has happened contextually within those societies and why has anti-Semitism risen again immediately after 7th of October? Not today, Not in June, not in January, not even after Israel went into Gaza, but at the point where Israel was still mourning and counting her dead. And then the last one, because we're academics, looks at universities. And look, I work in a university and I think they're really important, that we all work in jobs that we think are really important. Universities do become kind of reflection of society. What's happening in university campuses across the world reflects what's going to happen in schools and social work and politics and businesses, because these students go out into the wider world and they take forward their ideas. I'm not someone that sees anti-Semitism under every carpet and around every corner. But let's be clear, there are encampments in universities across the world. There might be a small number of people compared with the majority who are doing nothing about the encampments, but many of them are not being challenged by that silent majority either. And it's really important that we understand how and why we got there in university. I have my own theories, bless you.
Thank you.
David has his own theories, and I think all of the academics involved in this have different nuance and understanding depending on the countries we're in and the disciplines we're from. But we have to understand that the university students of today are the people of every part of society and in leadership positions tomorrow. That's why we gave an entire volume over to what's going on in universities. Now, the books are raw and they are urgent and they are difficult to read. Many of the people that I've shown the books to at various points have liked some pieces more than others. And I don't think that everyone will sit down and read them like you would read a novel or a historical artifact or anything else. But for us, it was a privilege, and I'm really proud of the fact that we have documented something that was going on within the diasporic community at that moment in time. We chose not to talk specifically about Israel, but many people have responded to it. We have an incredible piece by an ex-Haredi woman talking about her response to the sexual violence that occurred. The sexual violence that most of the world has been silent about, including the feminists that I used to call my sisters. We have, as I say, John Strawson's piece about visiting Kfar Aza. So that does touch upon Israel, but it really was about documenting the responses to October the 7th around the world. Because 45% of Jews live in this country, and as my colleague Michael Solberg says, the other 45%, the other half of the 90%, live in America, and 10% of the rest of us is spread around. You know, you've got 13 in Egypt, and I know this from doing a UN report on Jews in 2019. You've got 40 in Burma, you've got 250,000 in England. But much of the understanding of what goes on around October the 7th rightly is focused on Israel, and we wanted to rightly focus on the other 55% of us in the world. I hope that you will have a chance to read the book. Enjoy is the wrong word, but I hope that it's a provocation for us sitting in this room, for non-Jews, for allies, even for those who are against Israel, but say that they are not anti-Semitic, to read, to understand what has been going on for all of us, 15 million out of 8 billion people in the world, 0.2% since the atrocities. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's my great pleasure to invite Israel's envoy for combating anti-Semitism, Michal Cotler.
Thank you for everybody who's here, anybody who's listening in on Zoom. Thank you to the Begin Center for providing this opportunity, and to David and the team for doing the important work on contemporary anti-Semitism. It's a very special place for me. Some of you may know the Begin Center. And actually, I think regarding the topic of today, and after Paul's introduction and the talk we just heard, it's very important for me to make sure that we understand that here, what Menachem Begin understood very well, I am not a Jew with trembling knees, is precisely what the state of Israel is. Not a Jew with trembling knees. And if I quote another great leader of the Jewish people and of this country, Golda Meir, who explained that the world hates a Jew that hits back. And she also said that the world only loves us when we're to be pitied after post 10/7. I'm not really sure about that either, or that in the name of Dara Horn's book, People Even Love Dead Jews. But if I focus on the first part, that the world hates a Jew who hits back, I want to make very clear to us before I begin my statement, that the state of Israel is the Jew that can hit back for the first time in thousands of years. And in that sense, it's very important for me to relay, as Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, which most Israelis don't know exists, a special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, why it is critical, if I would just add to what Paul said, that we understand that anti-Semitism is not just a thing of diasporic Jews. The same anti-Semitism that fueled the atrocities, the war crimes, the crimes against humanity of 10/7 is the anti-Semitism that fuels the responses to the atrocities, to the war crimes, to the crimes against humanity of 10/7. The responses of silence, Me Too, unless you're a Jew, today's International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Crime. Silence of the women's organizations. The responses of denial that began even while the barbaric savages, 4,000 plus, perpetrating their atrocities, live streamed the rape, the burning, the mutilation, the massacre, the abduction. Denial. The understanding that responses of justification, from the river to the sea and glory to our martyrs, projected on George Washington University on my first of many emergency trips to the United States, understanding that they are echoing Hamas's charter. That's not pro-Palestinian, that's pro a genocidal terror proxy of an Islamic regime in Iran, but one genocidal terror proxy alongside Hezbollah from the north, the Houthis from the Red Sea, and Iran itself that attacked Israel on April 14th. And finally, the attack of Jews around the world as a response to the atrocities, to the war crimes, to the crimes against humanity, perpetrated in the worst attack of Jews since the Holocaust on 10/7. So I want to make very clear, and I do everywhere that I go, in Israel and around the world, we are at an existential moment, for the state of Israel that, as I said in Berlin, which got the crowd really riled up, the state of Israel does not exist because the Holocaust occurred. It's precisely the opposite. The Holocaust could not have occurred had the state of Israel existed. And the understanding that that is what is being taught. When the understanding that the state of Israel, our Declaration of Independence, another great leader somewhere on these walls, clearly stipulates the state of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And I'll say in my legal terminology, a prototypical indigenous people. When I say that to a room full of Canadian or Australian students, they say, you can't say that. I say, no. Not only can I say it, I can prove it to you. A prototypical indigenous people that speaks the same language Hebrew and reads the same book that was desecrated on the 10/7 massacre of Simchat Torah, the Tanakh, and traverses the same land, Israel, and practices the same customs and rituals for thousands of years. That's what indigeneity means. And what I want to posit here today, the understanding that we are the same side of the same coin in the way that we experience this existential moment for that state of Israel to which the Jews, a prototypical indigenous people, returned after thousands of years of exile and persecution, committed to equality. That's the Declaration of Independence. And the understanding that what we experience around the world, where the other half of us, 45% plus 10%, in the rest of the world, 45% in the United States and Canada, 10% in the rest of the world, the understanding that what we are experiencing is actually a never again, this right now moment. That never again is now moment is not just existential for the nation state of the Jewish people. That instead of being the state of the Jews has been turned into the Jew of the states. That understanding of the existential moment is not just for Jews around the world. As I said, being attacked, there was a 12-year-old girl raped in Paris because her boyfriend found out that she hid that she is a Jew. There is, just this week when I was in Canada, a completely destroyed sign announcing the Holocaust Museum that is to be built in Montreal. There are demonstrations and encampments on campuses of the best universities in the United States of America, in the UK, that actually very clearly say, Jew's not welcome, because let's be honest, Zionist is just code for Jew. But this is more important to make clear across, I'm going to say, political, religious, and geographic divide, because this existential moment, it's not just about the state of Israel and the Jews around the world. It's an existential moment for democracies. It's an existential moment for what we understand, and there are people sitting in this room that have been documenting in all kinds of ways, from the legal perspectives, from following the money of non-for-profit organizations, the understanding that it is international law and its mechanisms and its principles that have been systematically co-opted and weaponized for decades in a war that is raging for public opinion, that has demonized and delegitimized and applied double standards to the Jew among the states. Precisely what it is that historically anti-Semitism did: demonize and delegitimize and apply double standard to the individual Jew, barring him or her from an equal place in society. The understanding that the international law mechanisms created, entrusted to uphold, promote, and protect these foundational principles so that never again are enabling a world in which again and again, as we speak in Sudan, there is actually a genocide being committed. Actually, those very leaders that are perpetrating, what wouldn't you know it, hosted in South Africa, even as it launched its attack of the state of Israel in the International Court of Justice, accusing it of genocide. And I want to make very clear, 1975 Zionism is racism, UN resolution, Soviet propaganda is alive and well on every single university campus. Zionism is racism, is the first moment in which we may have missed it. We tore up the resolution, but this unconventional war for public opinion began. In today's world, you cannot say that you are a Zionist because that is synonymous to saying that you are a racist. We have to understand that everywhere I speak about anti-Semitism, the demonstrations against me are Zionists not welcome. So anti-Zionism is the new, modern, mutated, normalized strain, if you will, of anti-Semitism, the same pernicious hate that Jews know and knew to identify for thousands of years, just mutated. Zionism is racism, step number one. Step number two, or another blood libel that has been percolating for decades. Israel is an apartheid state following, and some of us in the room were there, the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism turned anti-Semitic hate fest that actually then peddled the next blood libel on every single university campus. And in this, maybe I would just disagree, because there already are 23 years of university graduates who believe that the state of Israel is an apartheid state. The next blood libel following that Durban Conference Against Racism, because on all those campuses across North America, Israel Apartheid Weeks have been held ever since. 23 years of Israel Apartheid Weeks. No question mark about that. And finally, we're living through the most Orwellian inversion of fact and of law that accuses the state of Israel, the Jew of the state, or the Jew among the nations, if you will, of perpetrating genocide, a term that, as my father taught me, we should shudder when we speak, coined by Raphael Lemkin, whose entire family was annihilated in the Holocaust alongside crimes against humanity by Lauterbach, in order to describe atrocities too terrible to imagine, but not too terrible to have happened, and who dedicated his life to the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, even as that state of Israel, the Jew among the nations, defends itself from openly declared genocidal intent and the perpetrating of war crimes and crimes against humanity by one proxy, openly declared genocidal intent, right there in the Hamas charter of that murderous regime in Iran that daily calls Twitter and every other available mechanism for the annihilation of the Zionist state, that is the state of Israel. So when we meet today, this existential moment, and I promise I won't end with such a depressing sort of analysis, I want to say to you that this is a defining moment. 76 years after the return of our indigenous people to our ancestral homeland after thousands of years, it's a defining moment, first and foremost, for Jews around the world and Israel, to recognize that this is a war. It's not just PR, or in Hebrew, Hezbollah. It is a war. It's an unconventional war that if in the past, including when I was in Knesset, I would say will dictate Israel's ability to fight on all other war fronts, it is dictating Israel's ability to fight on all other war fronts. We see it. And the first thing we need to do as a people is to remember the history, thousands of years of history of the Jewish people that repeats not exactly in the same way. History doesn't repeat exactly the same way, it rhymes. So we're going to have to identify this rhyme in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and use it in the way that it was intended to be used as a resource. The second piece of that is to reclaim our story. Because as I often say to university students, I'm not white. I'm sorry, but that's not my story. Don't apply an irrelevant social construct to the story of the Jewish people. But we have to be the ones that reclaim our story as an indigenous people. We have to be the ones that reclaim our identity as Zionists. We have to be the ones that reclaim those words, racism, apartheid, genocide, because if they are appropriated in this way, that becomes everybody's problem, not just ours. And finally, to renew the covenant that we have, not just the understanding that the social construct we just read on Shavuot, the social construct of those 10 commandments was created so that humans can coexist, but our own social construct, our own social contract, the Declaration of Independence, declaring precisely what it is that the state of Israel is. Doesn't mean all Jews have to live here, not at all. Though I have an extra bedroom in Ranana and everybody is welcome. It doesn't mean that. It means that Jews around the world have to recognize a little bit of what was said before. Even as the entire Israeli society is deployed to the war front that is raging here, there are 6 million boots on the ground that need to be able to be deployed to the unconventional war for public opinion and to transcend and reach across differences of politics, of religion, of denomination, in order to create the allyships that we will need in order to fight this war. This is not, like any subject of hate, a war that we will be able to fight alone. And we do have friends, but we need to reach across all kinds of aisles that we've created and be able to fight this war together with all those that recognize that 10-7, and I call it 10-7 purposely, because like 9/11, it was the attack of barbarism on civilization. It was not just an attack on the state of Israel or on all the kibbutzim that are peace-loving on Israel's southern border. That's not all it was. It was the attack of barbarism on civilization. And we will have to reach across to those allies to make sure that we can fight this war of barbarism on civilization together with allies that we do have across the world. But it starts with us. It starts with the Jewish people that reclaim our identity, that reclaim the story of the Jewish people, and that are reminded and remind others what it is, and that renew the covenant to one another and to those foundational principles of human rights that we are committed to upholding, promoting, and protecting. So thank you, and I look forward to the conversation, and thanks again for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Michal. I'm going to invite Michal. Don't get too comfortable. I'm going to invite you back up. So I'm going to invite Michal and David Hirsh and Rosa Freedman onto the front.
In the order, Paul?
Not really.
Oh, no. Oh.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So I think we'll start. We'll start with you, David, as we haven't heard from you yet. So Rosa said in her presentation that she came to you with this proposal, and I'm interested in your. How did you see the necessity of this? How did you feel about the need for something like this in the context of what was happening in what you were seeing and experiencing in the UK in those weeks after October 7th?
So one of the things that was preoccupying me a little bit was this. Everybody was saying this is something completely new. This is a watershed moment. Nothing like this has happened before. This changes history. And I kind of felt like that, but I kept asking why. Why is it? What's new about this? Like, I kept thinking, you know, in 48, in 67, in 73, there were not just Toyota pickup trucks, but tanks and planes and armies. And we always said that if they had been victorious, then pretty well this is what they would have done on a bigger scale. And then, so for years, a lot of people didn't really take that seriously. They didn't really believe us. And then we saw that, at least with Hamas, look, it's true. That is what Hamas would like to do. But then people still didn't really believe us, or they didn't really take it seriously, or they trivialized it. They said, they denied it, they blamed the victims, and it seems that there's a sense in which for people who are open to anti-Semitism, that any suffering, literally any suffering that the Jews might suffer is trivial compared to the suffering that the Jews cause. And that is partly the explanation for the excitement with which the genocide allegation comes to the fore, because the genocide allegation finally means that the Jews are, you know, like the Nazis. That's a little bit of an answer anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think I also Michal mentioned the Zionism is racism resolution. I feel like what David's saying, and it all goes back to that, and the sort of the kind of thrill that these that people get from the idea that now it's okay, now we've found a way to criticize Jews, because we can talk about Zionism, and Zionism is racism, and Israel's an apartheid state, and Israel's committing genocide. So all these things are legitimate. And maybe I just want to ask you, I know in your role, you mentioned these many visits you've done to the United States. Can you just speak to that a little bit of some of what you experienced in the US, and maybe other places, but the US, as we know, is where most of the Jews are, and we know a lot of things happening there. So if you could just speak to some of that.
Absolutely. So thank you. I want to say, first of all, there are about 30 special envoys for combating anti-Semitism around the world. So Israel was very late in the game to join. I'm Israel's second special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, and the recognition that this is an extremely important role, not just in countries around the world where anti-Semitism was already on this crazy increase before 10/7, right? That my colleagues were appointed much before 10/7 in the last 5 to 10 years, depending on which country. But the understanding that in the United States also has a special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, the tsunami of anti-Semitism, I have no other word, the tsunami of anti-Semitism is actually just a manifestation, an awful manifestation of what we have seen in the intersection, in the responses to 10/7 that has happened, and you mentioned it, in the international institutions, Zionism is racism, that has fed what is happening on university campuses in many ways, and maybe we can drill down on that. And of course, in the social media reality, we would be remiss. So those three, I'm going to call them war fronts, intersected in the responses to 10/7. And in the United States, what became so, I'm going to say terrible, including a meeting with many of the university presidents, those that were in Congress, those that haven't yet been to Congress, is the understanding that the systematic, not just demonization and delegitimization, but I'm going to say the double standard is systemic and systematic, meaning there is a DEI infrastructure in every single university, corporation, business in the United States, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it naturally excludes David, who happens to be a Jew, I don't know, Fred, who happens to be a self-defined Zionist, and Bob, who happens to believe that Israel has a right to exist. It naturally does it, meaning the infrastructure that's being created leaves them out. So when you're meeting with university presidents, the only way for them to actually be combating anti-Semitism is to use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. I'm going to say the result, of a long democratic process, including that's been adopted by the United States, 40 other countries, the result of a very long democratic process that has seen tremendous pushback, not just until 10-7, but since 10-7. So the United States National Strategy for Combating Anti-Semitism, which was rolled out just a little over a year ago, actually doesn't refer solely to the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. And even past 10-7, including after meeting with the second gentleman and the task force that's, responsible for the implementation of this national strategy, the understanding that if it's not going now to be updated to include IRA, then guess what? They're not really identifying and combating this strain of anti-Semitism, the normalized strain. And I'm looking at Isabella because she has researched this extensively. It's not new, right? Anti-Zionism as this mutated mainstream strain of anti-Semitism, that's old news, except that it is what has presented itself post 10-7 across the United States. And the most worrying part to me is the pushback on IRA, because in no university space, by the way, it's already high school, it's elementary school, it's not just university. We would be remiss if we focus just on university. It's educational school boards, it's police, or law enforcement, it's cities, it's the entire country. The understanding that if you don't define, it's not because I'm a lawyer, my kids would say it's because I'm a lawyer. If you don't define something, you can't identify it. And if you don't identify it, you can't combat it. Now, when you know that anti-Semitism is this ancient hatred that mutates over time, you're going to have to define all the different strains of it. Post-COVID, everybody's a viral expert. It doesn't help if you inoculate your society from COVID-19 when Omicron comes along. Well, anti-Zionism, if you will, is the new strain of anti-Semitism, and it not going to help if we enable that strain to run rampant. That is the most worrying part of what is seen, I would think, in the pushback, not just in the United States, across spaces and places. I mentioned university spaces, the international institutions, and social media. And the piece about social media, maybe we'll drill down a little bit more, because the understanding that what happens online does not remain online. We have to know that. So we just held a meeting with the social media platforms that basically continues the discussion that we began with them when I was in Knesset about the national security threat of anti-Semitism, but we held it in the State Department, my counterpart in the United States, Deborah Lipstadt. The understanding that anti-Semitism is signaling something very serious to the national security of countries or places or spaces that allow it to run rampant. And the only way to do that, again, is with the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism comprehensively identified.
Okay.
Answer.
I had a question for you, but I want you to have a chance to respond as well.
Can I add to this also? So when we understand anti-Semitism, we think about right-wing, neo-Nazi, fascist anti-Semitism. We think about radical left anti-Semitism, and we think about radical Islamic anti-Semitism. So it's a triangle. And we in Israel, we in the diaspora, I think as a global community, are quite good at combating right-wing, fascist, neo-Nazi anti-Semitism. We recognize it, it's criminal damage, it's swastikas, and we know what it leads to. Where it comes to the radical left and radical Islamic anti-Semitism, we're not so good at it, particularly where they pair up together. And that's what we're seeing today, both in terms of the genocidal intent of Hamas and of Hezbollah and of every other proxy of Iran, including Iran itself, even if they don't put it into their constitutions, and in terms of the radical left, who are so enthralled with challenging capitalism that they will get into bed with anyone that wants to challenge America, including radical Islamists, which is how we ended up with Iran and the revolution in the first place. So I think when we're talking about anti-Semitism, I'm a lawyer, I think we have to define what we're talking about in order to challenge it. I agree with you 100% on that. I'm also a feminist, and we also say the same thing as feminists. We have to define anti-Semitism as this triangle, and we have to acknowledge the parts of anti-Semitism that right now, there are a few really right-wing fascist neo-Nazis in America who are lining up with the radical left and the radical Islam anti-Semites. Many of the right-wing in my country are marching against it. It doesn't mean they're on the side of the Jew. They just hate the radical left and the radical Islamists more than they hate the Jew right now today. But I think we have to define this triangle. Rather than just talk about anti-Semitism, we have to talk about all three strands to know what we're fighting against.
Yeah, sure.
Rosa, there was a brilliant piece in the Anthology in the Law and Society one by Hessler, in which he made that argument. He said that anti-Semitism is not recognized explicitly in international law. Will you just go through his argument?
So he wasn't so much talking about the triangle of anti-Semitism. He was saying, a little bit like you were saying, that anti-Semitism falls between two areas. So we've got freedom of religion and belief, and we've got sort of being anti-racial discrimination, right? Anti-Semitism falls between those two. Being a Jew isn't a race, but it's not just a religion. And so once it hits that crack between the two, this is actually where we got to Zionism as racism. It didn't start in the 1970s. It started when the United Nations wanted to create a human rights treaty, convention, on eliminating racial discrimination. And the Americans said, oh, when we're eliminating racial discrimination, should we try and eliminate anti-Semitism? And the Soviets, who just had a massive wave of anti-Semitism in the 1950s, went, yeah, we can eliminate anti-Semitism, but Zionism is racism. And that's where the battle began in the 60s. This equating anti-Semitism with Zionism as racism was an excuse for the Soviet Union to continue to allow anti-Semitism within country, colony, empire, whatever you want to call it. But because whether it's in the diversity, equality, and inclusion setting, whether it's within the equalities law, whether it's within international human rights, or because being a Jew doesn't fit neatly into are you a race or a religion, it just gets pushed to the side. And I think this comes back to what you were saying in your talk. If we define anti-Semitism as treating a Jew or Jews as different to all other people, then when anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism, is treating Israel as different to all other states. I challenged my vice-chancellor and said, you brought out all sorts of statements about 9/11, Black Lives Matter, all sorts of things where you stood up against terrorist atrocities. Why aren't you standing up for Israel? Why are you treating Israel as different, or the Jews as different to all others? And to be fair to him, like some vice-chancellors, not many, but some, he did stand up and he understood it. But we have to define our own terms. And coming back to Ira, last point I'll make. We as Jews get to define what anti-Semitism is, just like Black people get to define what anti-Black racism is, and people with disabilities get to define what ableism is. But we have to reclaim that space, and there aren't very many of us, so we have to find a way to do it.
Just for those who aren't familiar, either in the room or on Zoom, IRA refers to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which is accepted across the world in many countries and many institutions, and which includes in its description, or in the examples that it gives of what could constitute anti-Semitism, it includes the way in which Israel can be talked about with double standards, or treated differently to, or demonized, or treated differently to other countries. And for many people that don't like the idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, or that there's any connection between the two, because they want to go on criticizing or condemning or slamming Zionism without being called an anti-Semite, they rebel against this definition. So I think it's...
I just want to make very clear, but the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, as I said before, is a result of a long democratic process that actually began after the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism, when it became clear to those in the space that it was human rights and its mechanisms and its institutions and its principles that were co-opted and weaponized to enable this mutation of anti-Semitism. It didn't come out of thin air. And that very long democratic process, which the alternate definitions, of course, anybody can sit down and write a definition, and I can say, yeah, we don't like that definition. But the result of a very long democratic process has had significant pushback. And the IRA includes not only the 11 examples of the way that anti-Semitism has presented itself over time, and that enables us to identify all strains or all forms of a shape-shifting hatred, but also very clearly stipulates right at its beginning that criticism of the state of Israel is not anti-Semitism. In fact, as we well know as Israelis, criticism of the state of Israel, like any other state, is just fine. What is not fine is calling into question Israel's very right to exist. And I want to make very clear, there is no country in the world whose very right to exist is called into question. Not Iran, not Pakistan, not the United States, not France, no country in the world. And that's why that demonization and that delegitimization and those double standards are so critical and are integral to the IRA working definition, not only the result of a long democratic process, but one that's been adopted by more than 40 countries, by more than 1,200 entities. Now, those countries have to be held to account to implement it, because it's not enough to just, by the way, the UK, many universities have adopted IRA. So I have an easier starting conversation with university presidents in the UK than I do in the US, who haven't adopted IRA, except they have to implement it. They actually have to utilize it as the resource that it was intended to be to identify anti-Semitism. And one more thing, because very often I'm told this, I have a Jew who says, doesn't like IRA, and he's an anti-Zionist. You can't imagine how many very intelligent university presidents said that to me as I was sitting with them in discussing IRA. And I want to say something that I say to them very clearly. Everybody has a right to self-define in our world. As do Jews and non-Jews have the right to self-define as anti-Zionists. What they don't have the right to do is to tell me and the majority of Jews who self-define as Zionists, and many non-Jews who self-define as Zionists because they believe in Israel's right to exist, that we don't get to live, that we don't get to be afforded the exact same protection as they are afforded, whether it's on university campuses or in the international institutions or on social media spaces. And therefore, the understanding that they are protected, even if they're anti-Zionist Jews, by whatever infrastructure protects everybody else, but they expect me to be excluded. And I have begun lectures where there have been sit-ins or teach-ins against me by saying, my name is Michal and I'm a Zionist. It's my identity. It's who I am. I can't just shed my Zionist pound of flesh to be a good Jew. Maybe other Jews do, and they can, that's their right. But you cannot tell me and many other non-Jews who self-define as Zionists, we don't have a right to our identity. And that's a part of the conversation that the IRA enables and is so critical, including in university spaces.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. David, I wanted to ask you, I know you've been involved in this whole issue for such a long time. In fact, I don't want to. This might embarrass you, but when I was graduating university, I was reading your stuff on the Engage. Anyway, now that I've done that, what I wanted to ask you was.
That's right. Paul is very.
Yes. Well. I mean, everything's relative. But what I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned right at the beginning that you were thinking of how is this different from 6 Day War, Yom Kippur War. But what I wanted to ask you was, how is this different, or how is what's going on now different from all the fights that you've been engaged in since the early 2000s, when you first got involved in this whole question of boycotts of Israel, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, that kind of thing?
So when I was first involved in it, was even before, probably when you were in primary school, was when I was a student. And in the mid-80s, people like the Socialist Workers' Party in Britain were already drawing on the 1970s Zionism equals racism principle, and they were saying that Zionists in the student movement are racists, and therefore they don't have any legitimate place in the student movement, and therefore Jewish societies which are Zionists should be closed down and should be not accepted as part of the student movement. So that was going on in the mid-80s, and we had a fight over that, but it was largely a fight that was confined to the far left, which is the place where I was hanging out at that time. And so the key way of understanding the difference, I think, is that there has been a process of mainstreaming. That what was confined to, people who thought they were Marxists and wanted to overthrow the state, etc., became more and more mainstream. So that happened. I mean, the 2001 was a real moment, right? Was the apparently what may turn out to have been the end of the peace process. In January 2001, there was the Durban World Conference Against Racism in August 2001, and then a week later was 9/11. And it was not unreasonable to think that anti-Semitism in the late 20th century was really on its way out. There were some, vestiges of it, but it was not mainstream. And suddenly in 2001, those three events kind of heralded a new mainstreaming of it. Throughout the 90s, most people on the left didn't think Israel was a unique evil on the planet. They thought Israel would do a deal with the Palestinians and there would be a state. Some people did hold on to the idea that it will never work, right? Peace could never work because Israel is a unique evil and you cannot make peace with it. And those people suddenly found their strength in 2001, straight after the end of the peace process. And they said, right, now we're going back to this. And a whole load of threads went into the Durban conference to reconstruct that. And they came out of the Durban conference all over the world. And in Britain, for example, there was a thread from Durban which began with, shouldn't we boycott Israeli academia? Shouldn't we stop funding Israeli academia? So in 2002 and 3, people like Hillary and Stephen Rose started making those arguments in the Guardian. And then 2003, 2005, there were debates to boycott Israeli academia at the union conferences. And we had that fight between then and about 2011, about 5 or 6 years, which, to be honest, on the boycott itself, it ended up in a stalemate, right? They never instituted their boycott. Good, because mainly because we frightened them, and they thought there would be legal repercussions if the unions organized the boycott. So there was a nasty stalemate on the boycott, but on anti-Semitism, we lost completely. And people had always said to us, why are you spending all this time fighting with these, morons on the far left of UCU? And we said, because if we lose it here, it will go into the mainstream. And it went through the unions, and then by a whole sort of quite fairly unexpected speed and processes, it went into right to the head of the Labour Party very quickly. This was the moment of the kind of rise of populism of Trump and Brexit and all kinds of stick it to the man ideology. And Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. And so again, a process of mainstreaming from the far left to somebody knocking on the door of Downing Street, not once, but twice in 2017 and 2019. And then they got smashed, not by people who had a kind of rational critique of what they were saying, but by let's get Brexit done, actually. That was the alternative. So we went down that road, and then the anti-Semites were kind of pushed out of the leadership and the structures of the Labour Party, but largely came back to campus and were organising again on campus. And they were on the up. And there was a kind of stab in the back myth beginning again. We can't have nice things. We can't have a proper NHS. We can't have free Wi-Fi. We can't have nice trains, because the Jews will stop us from electing a prime minister like Jeremy Corbyn. We can't have nice things. And that was literally, I can tell you who said that, but I won't. And so there was a kind of stab in the back. The hashtag was, it was a scam, right? This is the Livingston formulation. The idea that when Jews said there's a problem with anti-Semitism, it was a scam. They were lying. They were lying in order to delegitimize criticism of Israel and to hurt Corbyn and stop him introducing nice trains and other nice things. So this was bubbling up. And then we had 7 October. And Anthony Julius writes a piece in the book about one of the ways in which things changed in Britain. And that was that many British Jews who had quite a significant faith in the institutions of the British democratic state began to lose that faith in the BBC, for example. It had always been a bit cranky, right? The people who said, oh, the BBC and the Guardian are anti-Semitic. But the Today programme legitimized the claim that Israel was murdering children deliberately and was committing genocide. And
this is the main BBC radio news program.
So, and the story of the war was not being told, and in its place, there was a story of individuals suffering terrible things unjustly. And most of those individuals were Palestinians, some of them were Jews, but it was, the story of the war became the number. 10,000 people are dead, 15,000 people are dead. And it's like, there was a time when the laws of war no one had heard of them, and people said, war is war and people suffer, and that's what war is like. And then we, kind of people who believe in the rule of law, said, no, not everything is legitimate during war. And there was built up the Geneva Conventions and the law of genocide and legal restrictions on what could be done during wartime. And now it's as if there's a step further, which is that the legal restrictions on violence against civilians is all that is left. And people have forgotten what war is at all. And people don't understand how it works and why it might be necessary. So the story of the war is only told as the suffering, the unjust suffering of ordinary people. And so those are the ways in which what the SWP were doing in 1984 on campus moved to the mainstream. Through the Today program, people tended, sometimes the Metropolitan Police wasn't really attacking anti-Semitism in the way that people felt they should do. There's been a few really awful judgments in the courts in Britain. And I would be really careful before I got taken to court or before I took anyone to court for libel, because the judges are so affected by this culture of not seeing the anti-Semitism. I would be afraid. So the institutions and so mainstream.
Okay, just on the numbers. I don't know if anyone here has read John Spencer, who's been brilliant as head of the urban warfare at West Point. And he's not only has he written really I think compelling pieces explaining about how the numbers are not what you think and how obviously we should trust Hamas's numbers anyway, but also that the civilian combatant ratio is actually extraordinarily impressive, if you sort of mean in the Israeli perspective. But he's also said something that I hadn't heard before recently, that he made the point that in all his covering of wars over many years, he's never ever known this obsessive focus on numbers, but also on this counting of who's a civilian, how many civilians. He's never seen it before. And for someone like him, who's not Jewish, who previously wasn't part of this whole pro-Israel, anti-Israel discourse, he's one of these people that's noticed, like, hang on, there is something different about the way people talk about Israel. There is some different way in which Israel is discussed and judged. And I think that was very telling. Okay, I have a million other questions, but I want to get to questions from people, our guests here. So the lady here who immediately put her hands up. Yes.
Yes. It's very overwhelming. I'm sorry if this sounds shallow, but could you dig into yourselves and say the type of anti-Semitism is so bad? I know that I've come into contact in England with really good non-Jewish people who fought Jeremy Corbyn and who now are really fighting Israel's side. If you're not too modest, please don't be too modest. Either could you say something that you feel you have achieved that's positive, either you have achieved or that has been achieved, rather than this
call for positivity. Okay,
I just want
very
to
good. Positive. Okay, who wants to go first, Michal?
I'll say one thing that I have found positive and optimistic, but I think we shouldn't take for granted, and that is that there are across the board people on the streets that have seen something go very wrong in their society. Meaning if signs of Kfir Bibas, 8 months old when he was abducted, are being torn off because the people tearing it down, that's not a human baby. And if it's a human baby, it's just a Jewish baby, it doesn't matter. There are people on the streets that recognize that something has gone really astray in their society, really, really astray. Now, that doesn't mean that they know what to do about it. And I think that that is the place of a call to action that includes Jews and non-Jews, it doesn't matter. But that is a call to action that requires reaching out or reaching across difference and an activation of those people to actually combat what it is that they're seeing on the streets. It's not that simple. The other sort of hopeful piece that I see, the silver lining, is that for the first time in a long time, I think that the Jewish people, and that's what we are, a people, have understood, whether we marched with the feminist movement after Judith Butler, who I studied in law school, explained that rape is armed resistance. I think that many women, Jewish women who self-defined as feminists, sort of understood that there is a real problem with the silence of the international organizations, places in which we ourselves differentiated ourselves from one another. Again, that is very, very hopeful, but hope, as the late Rabbi Sachs explained, is not like optimism, is not something we can rely on. It requires action and courage. So those are the hopeful pieces that I've identified, whether within the Jewish people or the general sort of societies in which I've spoken in, you know, and spoken at. But again, it's really an existential moment. So it requires a lot of action and a lot of leadership and moral clarity.
Thank you, Rosa.
So I think within universities, the fact that people from West Point, like Michael Schmidt, have been platformed, including at my university, to talk about the conflict, to talk about urban warfare, to talk about exactly what you said, that usually in urban warfare, it's double, triple, quadruple the number of civilians that died. That's a positive, excuse me. I think the other, sorry, I'm going to go and cough. I think the other positive is how we're coming together over this, excuse me.
So my instinct is to say this, there's no upside, right? Anti-Semitism is irrational, it's wrong, it's frightening, and there's no upside. And all we want is for it to go away. All we want is for the anti-Semites to stop. And people often say, you know, well, can't we have what's the good outcome here? What, you know, let's have a nice story of I don't know, something nice. There are many nice things in the world. I would love to be doing all kinds of sociology that would be really nice and interesting and everybody would love, right? I'd like to write about women's football. I'd like to write, but the anti-Semites have to stop, and that's it. There's no winning here. It's an anti-Semitism struggle.
I know that. I just want to say, what have you achieved? Because I know you have achieved.
Cast humility aside.
Yes, cast humility aside. What have you achieved, David?
All right. I mean, look, so I've been fed an opportunity to talk about the London Centre and the work that we're doing, which I am quite proud of, although it is small and embryonic and it is not what it needs to be. We decided that finally we needed to institutionalize the work in academia, mainly because there were hardly any of us left, right? There are people who in academia who do really good work against anti-Semitism, but many of them are retired or they earn their living doing computational linguistics, Shalom Lapin, and they do really interesting stuff on anti-Semitism on the side. There are very few people in Britain who study contemporary anti-Semitism professionally and who teach about it and who research about it. And what we decided it was time to do was to create the structures and the networks and to institutionalize them and to create the academic community from which we are generally excluded and to create the infrastructure of scholarship, publishing, funding. That's the kind of things that we are trying to do. And everybody knows and everybody says that there's a problem of anti-Semitism on campus, but nobody knows how to get inside the disciplines, inside the lecture theatres, inside the reading lists, inside academia. And there are lots of kind of half-baked initiatives to teach students, like give students a couple of days training in this or that. But what we need to do is to enable people to build academic careers and to have research funding and to take, how do you take on Judith Butler? You don't just walk in the room where she is and start shouting your crap and this is why, right? You have to write a book. You have to take 3 years to write a book explaining what is going on here with Judith Butler. So in order to get inside academia and therefore to have a chance of really impacting inside the campuses, which are, of course, the nursery for people's political identities into the future, we need to get the infrastructure and the community of scholarship working for good work against anti-Semitism and by extension in favor of democratic ways of thinking.
Okay, thank you. Anne.
Hi, thanks so much. That's sort of my question is along the lines of what you were saying, David. I spoke at Harvard Law School doing a talk on anti-Semitism and human rights at the beginning of November, right after the attacks. And after my talk, I had many Jewish students come up to me. They were actually crying. It was very moving. You know, they're saying, do people in Israel care about what's happening to us? And I said, I'm here because I care what's happening to you. And, but one of their biggest complaints or points of pain was that it was the administrations that were not giving them any support. And one of the at least positive developments in the United States that I've noticed is at least the business community and the donor communities are stepping up at the elite institutions and saying, you know, after the fiasco of the presidents at Congress, you know, saying, we're not giving you money anymore. And I guess what I'm worried about is like in the UK where it's not, I don't know if the, is there a way to develop that dynamic? Because to me, that sort of seems to be the only area now where we have hope for very powerful people to push back against what we've been seeing on campuses, especially.
Okay, so before I turn to David about the UK, I want to ask Michal about your experiences in the US dealing with administration.
So I want to say, and I think it might be relevant to the UK too. I think this is definitely true for the US and for Canada. A part of what has happened is that legislators, now there's a whole problem with that too, because anti-Semitism should never be politicized, right? I don't care if it comes from the extreme right or the radical left or the radical Islamist. Anti-Semitism has one definition, that's the importance of IRA. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It's the same anti-Semitism. It's the very same anti-Semitism. In fact, from the extreme right, it's not cool to say you're a Nazi, but it's very cool to say you're a progressive whatever, and therefore rape is armed resistance, right? It's very cool. If you look at those campuses, one of the biggest challenges, I think, and you're right, that it's the business community, but it should also be the parents. It should be legislators. It should be, and what we've seen, billions of Qatari dollars poured into American universities. That is an unbelievable understanding. And it's true for other democratic countries as well, certainly Canada, other European countries. That means that just withholding funds, if you're donors, that's not going to make or break the moment that we're experiencing right now. Because if universities have been weaponized in this way to actually create or uncreate the ability to study contemporary anti-Semitism in the way it should be studied, and a word of caution, the fact that there's something called contemporary anti-Semitism, there are many, many anti-Semitic, contemporary anti-Semitism scholars, right? It's not like, meaning the understanding that today's anti-Semitism is fueled by Holocaust studies professors. Because if you accuse the state of Israel, the Jew among the states, of perpetrating a Holocaust, imagine how evil you have to be, precisely how anti-Semitism works. How evil you have to be to have experienced a Holocaust and then to perpetrate the Holocaust. So it's not just about having contemporary anti-Semitism studies. It's very specific contemporary anti-Semitism studies that identify, that adopt the IRA. That's like my number one question. I ask Holocaust museums all over the world, including the Washington Holocaust Museums and others, do you use IRA? Do you teach IRA? Tens of thousands of students come through this museum to study about the Holocaust, but we've universalized the Holocaust as if, like, you know, it's that awful thing, man's inhumanity to man. Anti-Semitism is not just any other hatred. It's a very particular hatred that mutates by latching onto the guiding social construct of the time, religion, science, now the secular religion of our times, human rights. And the understanding that there is what to do, including across sectors, legislators, donors, parents, students, across sectors, there has to be an accountability or a holding to account. Social media platforms, a holding to account in a very, very systematic, strategic way. And I want to say the State of Israel has a very important role here. The fact that I'm sitting here as Israel's special envoy, most of you have no idea I exist. And around the world, no, really, I'm saying this seriously. The understanding that the State of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people should be at the forefront of creating a holistic strategy that recognizes that this is a war, that it has multiple places in which, and there are specializations like David's, like the Centers for Contemporary Antisemitism. There are specializations in university spaces, in the international law spaces. I'm looking at Anne and Gerald who are here. In the social media spaces, Decoding Antisemitism and Others, NCOA, there are specialized, except that there is an intersection of all of those war fronts, and that is really the next role of democratic governments, including the State of Israel, in creating holistic strategies that holds them to account at a much higher level than just specific war fronts, if you will, university, social media. I mean, because dividing and conquering is not going to work, and playing whack-a-mole in this way without a proactive strategy is certainly not going to work.
Thank you, Michal. I want to just ask David and Rosa, if, as well as she wants to chime in on this. In the UK, how are university administrations responding to this? And also, because it came up in Michal's answer in the American context, legislators, members of parliament, is that something that the centre has had any contact with?
So the university administrations have, in my experience, by and large, been really disappointing. I have actually been talking quite a lot to my own senior management at Goldsmiths, and we have had quite a lot of quite positive discussions over 2 or 3 years. They were really good at listening. They were really good at saying, we value what you do, we value your centre, we would like it to be part of the work of the college going forward. And 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the so-called Goldsmiths for Palestine were occupying the library building, and the senior management wanted to get rid of them. And they did that by agreeing to everything they asked for. Everything. So they began by saying, yes, we'll have another look at the IRA definition, which we have adopted with the Jerusalem Declaration, for the people who know the significance of that statement. And in fact, it wasn't even true that they had adopted the IRA definition, because they had adopted the first paragraph of the IRA definition. Then they said, we will look again at Goldsmith's financial affairs, and we will look at ethical investment. The problem is, of course, Goldsmiths doesn't have any money at all to invest. And where you think I'm joking, I spent this afternoon reapplying for my own job, because half the people in my department are being made redundant. And, you know, I wonder who they're going to choose. We'll see. So there is an absolute crisis. Just to go on with the things that they agreed to, they agreed that there should be a mural painted in the lobby of where the big lecture theatres are, commemorating, memorialising, they said, I don't know if anybody's dead, but memorialising the occupation of the library by these guys who were saying from the river to the sea, and they were saying David Hirsh is a far-right white supremacist.
I thought we were the occupiers.
Yes, and they were demanding that a particular donor who had given a very large amount of money to the new, rather lovely Goldsmiths art gallery, they were demanding that she should lose her honorary fellowship, because they said her husband is a friend of the Prime Minister of Israel, and she is a patron of the JNF, the Jewish National Fund. And so they agreed to that also. They said, we will have a review of all the fellows and donors of for the last 10 years. They didn't say looking for what, but they did say we will review them. And then that donor wrote back and said, I don't really want your fellowship anymore. But we know what it means. We know what a review means. It means going and looking for Jews, and then working out if, you know, somebody's husband is a friend of the Prime Minister of Israel, right? I could go on with the things they agreed to, but Rosa wants to come in.
So I want to come in on this. The UK has the Equality Act. It has a piece of law that protects people from discrimination, which America doesn't.
Title VI.
Title VI, but I mean, and in each state it's interpreted differently and it's not great, right? And in other countries, there's nothing at all. So we have to differentiate between universities in different countries and think about the law. And then we have to think about the types of universities. So where David works is quite elite in terms of the privileged young people that go to the university, not all of them. But then you have universities in America, you call them community colleges, we call them former polytechnics in the UK, where people are working non-stop in regular jobs and turning up just to get their degrees so that they can get a job and a better life. And we have to think about the range of universities and what's going on within them in a nuanced way. Because not every university is Goldsmiths or Harvard, and we need to deal with the Goldsmiths or UCLAs or those ones. But we also need to recognize that there is a silent majority within all of these universities. There's a silent majority in Goldsmiths that didn't challenge those occupiers in the library. There's a silent majority amongst university students generally, and we need to ask why it is that that silent majority is not standing up against what's going on. Because we can't necessarily address the radical left and the radical Islamists on campus, but what we can do is talk to the university administrations about the silent majority who really would like to get to the library to study, to get their degrees, because they're the ones that matter, right? A, they're paying a lot of fees, and B, they're there for the purpose of the university, knowledge production, learning, all of those things. If we allow these very small groups to take charge and do what they've done at Goldsmiths and UCLA as the real sort of examples of how terribly the universities have acted, then we're allowing them to win. And that's allowing fascism to win. It's a new form of fascism, but we know that fascism starts with a small but very vocal minority. And we need to think about working with the university administrators to work with the large but often silent. Now, we've heard that there are kids that go out and beat up these encampment protesters, not because they're really pro-Israel, not because they love Jews. They don't want people flying Palestinian flags in the middle of campus when they're trying to get home half drunk to their halls. They find them offensive. I'm also not supporting those people either. I don't like people beating up anyone. But we need to be working with the university to understand that the vast majority of university students do not want this level of protest. We have to protect free speech and the right to peaceful protest, but not the nonsense we've been seeing.
It's a really interesting question, actually, that we faced 10, 15 years ago in the boycott campaign, that UCU, the union was run by 400 or 500 activists who controlled Congress, and 200,000 academics allowed them to do so. And it's a real issue because partly, right, you can bet whatever you like that if those people at Congress were doing something that the 200,000 people really hated, they wouldn't allow it, right? They wouldn't allow Congress to say, we're going to ban abortion, right? It just wouldn't happen. And if they tried, they would be thrown out. But they are allowed to have a boycott of Israel. So it's a really interesting story about the core activists and the onion layer around them of people who think they're quite cool, and the onion layer around them of people who think that they're all right and they're one legitimate voice, even if they're a bit silly, and the people around them who are afraid to speak. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. And just on the Equality Act, I'm not at all sure that if you go to a judge and say these people are saying that Israel murders children and Israel commits genocide, that the judge would be able to understand why that was anti-Semitic. And we've had quite a lot of experience in judges not being able to do that.
I just want to add, what Dave just said, not to sound as sad as this makes me, actually, and I've said to many of the university presidents, chancellors, including the three in Congress, that the entire problem with what happened in Congress, actually, and I actually briefed the Education Committee the next day in Congress and said, really what needed to be very, very critically asked is, can you call for the genocide of any other people on your campus without violating your code of conduct? And the answer is a flat out no, because you can't even misgender somebody on today's university campuses without violating a code of conduct. And I think, just to continue what David was saying in his line of thinking, I think what I've said to many of the university presidents is, this is a moment of reckoning for academia, meaning our universities, is their role, is their mission to teach people how to think, which is what I believe I went to law school for, how to think, or very scarily, is it to teach people what to think, which in many ways, and I want to say that I began with myself being a lawyer and the great concern of international law and its mechanisms being weaponized, co-opted and weaponized. Yes, that is of grave concern, but I want to share with you that it's way beyond the law or humanities. We are talking now sciences. We are talking medical schools that are teaching the anatomy of occupation. I wish I was kidding. I wish I was kidding. We're talking about mathematics departments that are offering courses and medical schools that are offering courses and psychology that are talking about the psychology of occupation. There is a moment in which we've crossed over into the exact sciences where I think that not only do we have to engage the universities through every mechanism that we can find in understanding that what is actually at great risk is university, right? The role of university, right? The pursuit of knowledge for the sake of the pursuit of knowledge. And I just want to say this began long ago, and it's not just about Jews. My own doctoral research was about the attempted regulation of speech, right? But back when there were just trigger warnings and safe spaces and microaggressions before DEI. But if I just say one more word about DEI, and when I speak to university presidents, I say I'd like to apply whatever principles you have. If it's DEI, let it be DEI to everybody equally and consistently, because any rule that you apply selectively will collapse and won't be able to protect anybody. Not David, not Sally, not Bob from my previous example, but we have to remember what DEI actually stands for. And this is where it actually is a threat, if you would ask me, to democracies generally. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity is not equality. Equity is neo-Marxism. Equity measures results. It does away with Martin Luther King's dream for his 4 daughters that will be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. It's precisely what equity does not mean. And the understanding that here we are in this infrastructure that's being created to actually do away with meritocracy, to do away with good scholarship, to do away with any of those that actually use data-driven research and are teaching all kinds of things that are inculcating or indoctrinating an entire new generation, in addition to the 23 years of generations that have been indoctrinated, let's say with Israel's apartheid. This is not, again, just about Israel. It's not just about Jews. It is about the collapse of that international rules-based order and the mechanisms and the institutions, in this case, the universities, that were created to ensure all kinds of things never happened again. So I'm very concerned about that, including in the university spaces across the world. And I think that in that we have to enlist and engage with academics that in many ways have been silent or silenced or afraid and have to speak up at this moment of reckoning. Students say to me, where are the adults in the room? Where are they? So the students are on the front lines, and here we are, a generation that actually thought, and we're the anomaly, thought that freedom was free. But freedom is not free, as the laws of war clearly indicate. Wars happen and are very, very terrible and tragic. Except that freedom is not free, and there's a generation of students that's standing on the front lines with their faculty afraid to speak up because they may not get their job back or they may be fired and so on and so forth. Okay, it's done.
Okay.
It's not. She's right.
Okay, some people still have their hands up. What I want to do is, I know we have to finish. Okay, I think we have to finish. I'm sorry, some people have their hands up. Apologies for those that didn't get their questions asked. You can try and mock the speakers, Lily, and get questions answered that way. I apologize. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much to our guests. Freedman, jump out the books outside. I think you can get them, you can purchase them. The next event we have here is on July 1st. It's an event in remembrance of Joe Lieberman, who sadly departed a few months ago. So that's in memory and celebration of his life. So please join us. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry.
No. I work